Okay, good evening and welcome to another installment of our militarized equipment ad hoc. It is August 24th. Today we are going to take up the changes to the LRAD policy, the unmanned aerial systems policy. We don't have any new changes to the robots policy, and we may turn to Training Bulletin 3H for a quick overview to make use of the time specialty impact munitions. Shall we get started?
Yes. Well, let's see. Well, I think Commissioner Shea might be.
Yeah, looks like he is frozen. Hopefully he'll be back in, but why don't we go ahead and get started reviewing the policy, and he can.
All right, yeah, Lieutenant Curious, which one would you like me to cast up first? LRAD or the UAS? Oh, you're on mute.
Working off my cell phone. My office is getting redone and I have minimal cell phone reception in here. So why don't we go over the UAS policy, and because we changed the value statement, and I think that's about it. Just to go over that one. That one's the simplest one.
Okay. All right. So I'm gonna, unless you want me to, I'm gonna change this back to simple markup. All the red lines drive me crazy. All right. So yeah, just let me know where you'd like me to scroll. But yeah, I see the value statement changed a little bit, and yeah, any other, just let me know any other areas where you'd like me to sort of move the cursor, or you want to talk about the policy, and I'll follow along.
That was it. The only other thing that I wanted to go over, if we're fine with that, was reporting at the very last page on 10 that we wanted to include about complaints against department personnel procedures. I included it. Let's see, keep going down. Right, go up, I think. Right there, down there. I don't know if that's how we wanted it included. Right, going down. Where it says inquiry and complaint process. That's the way I wrote it up. I don't know if that's a little too much. I just kind of copied it from our K7. And then I just put refer to DGO K7 for additional information, as opposed to copying all the phone numbers and everything. I'm not sure how we want to include it in the policy.
Let's see, seems pretty straightforward to me. Okay. Yeah, Jennifer, I see your hand up.
Yeah. So I see it for complaints. Is there a different one for inquiries?
I think going back to K7, I thought I copied it exactly the way it was. I'm not sure if there's, I'd have to go back and look at K7 to see if there's a specific.
Oh wait, no. Oh, okay, I see what this is saying. It's
Yeah.
The name of the DGO is complaints against, but inquiries are also covered by this DGO.
So I think inquiries are actually covered by K7. Yeah, that's where we have all the inquiries about militarized equipment, and we do want to keep that all the references back there, because if we do change email addresses or phone numbers, we want to make sure we just change it in one place and we don't have outdated information kind of floating around, which has happened in the past.
The only other question I had about this policy is if we did revert back to the original retention policy.
Yes, I changed it to, I never changed the retention policy. What I did was, if we go each, let's see,
Oh yeah, I see what you did. I like that. Shall be retained
thank you,
5 days.
JT, for your help on this. Uh, and delete it on the 5th day. And that's page,
6. So for page 6, I think.
sorry, page 6, section B.
Yep.
So we decided to change it to retain 5, left it as 5 days, but we added and deleted on the 5th day just to make it very clear.
Thanks. That looks great. Those were my only questions.
Can we go back to the policy state, the value statement? I like this value statement. I think it brings the point that we wanted to, which was reaffirming commitment to privacy. I know that other value statements have referred back to the department's mission and values. Or is it core values? Are those relevant for this?
I guess so in the LRAD, I actually did that where I refer back to, and I kind of end it with that we'll be utilizing it in accordance with OPD core values and our mission. So if that's something that we want to do here, I have no problem. I kind of put that in the LRAD. I didn't put it in this statement. Not to say that we wouldn't be doing it. I can totally put it in here too. That's something I maybe include at the very end, something similar to the LRAD, which is what I did. The LRAD says, the way I finished it was, regardless of deployment, the LRAD will be utilized in accordance with OPD core values and our mission.
For me, it's just if it's relevant to this policy and you want to put it in here. Knowing that I do see it in other value statements.
Well, if we're seeing it in other value statements, and I don't have then we should just put it in here then. Unless JT, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's fine. It never hurts to refer back to our core values.
I mean, add NCOP is committed in safeguarding and respecting privacy of the community and has brought measures and policies in place to ensure none are violated. I mean, we can end it the same way, regardless of deployment. UASs will be utilized in accordance with OPD core values and our mission. I can add that.
I think that's good.
Okay.
I didn't have anything else for this policy either. I think it ticks off most of the boxes, save for the things that would be covered by the impact report. And we'll just wait for that. Good work. Remind me, is this covered under the local ordinance? Local ordinance, but not state, because it's not an area denial device,
It is
or
covered
the
under,
other way.
it is covered under state. I can quickly check for local.
Yeah, you know what? I don't think drones are covered under the local one. I think this is one of the ones where it's divergent.
Right. Yeah, I don't see it in the local. Okay, that means that we don't have to get it through commission by September 22nd then, right? Because that's our deadline. Or remind me which deadline is the right one.
The local has the September 22nd deadline. The state has October, I think, for Oakland.
And is that to get through commission or to get the city council?
For city council, because it's 180 days from when it was initially proposed.
I think that means that we can bring DQ back on this policy with the impact report sometime after September 22nd, but not too far after. Someone tell me if I'm wrong.
That sounds good to us.
Trying to save you from coming back when you don't have to.
Yeah. That will help us allow maybe focus on the impact reports as well and some of the other ones.
Yep.
Too. So.
All right, great. Anything else on unmanned aerial systems? This is not the end, of course. If anybody sees anything else, I'm sure they will let Lieutenant DQ know. And we will bring it back soon after the 22nd to go through the impact report, make sure we have all the boxes checked for the final pass through.
Okay. All right. Let me switch over here then to the LRAD.
Thank you, JT.
Yeah.
I should just having you do this all the time. So value statement. I searched a bunch of policies. Believe it or not, I was trying to look at other agencies' value statements, trying to find something, and I didn't find anyone with the value statement. One of the common things I did find was the fact of a lot of cities, kind of similar to mentioning the core values and the mission with maximizing the safety of all individuals involved in the incident. Something that every agency that I kind of searched had that in their value, but I also wanted to add in here that we're not using it as a area of denial device.
I'm also a fan of this value statement. I think I would change the first sentence to say the Oakland Police Department strives to deploy the LRAD to maximize the safety of all individuals. Because the policy will say so later on. I like the call out that it is not being used as an area of denial device. Appreciate that, and to be very clear and explicit about that. I like the purpose of what the reason for communicating from safe distances is. And that it refers back to its core values and mission when deployed or regardless of deployment.
Cool.
Anything else that should go into that value statement?
It sounds solid.
I hearing hearing some support. I think that's a good value statement. We are waiting to hear back from the LRAD representative. I think you can get some more, we'll get some more time to work on this and to get that information for this policy.
The main thing was the whole thing with the children, or when children are present.
There was also the decibel levels.
Yep. I want to confirm with that because I'm looking at outside agencies and I think it does. I don't know what the decibel rating is per color, but it sounds like the warning tone does change when you're going from green, yellow to red. So there is a maximum decibel level for each one, and it's at 137 for the 100X. Or I'm sorry, 137. I did add the whole non-continuous, continuous. I don't know if that became a little too messy, but that was something we had discussed on page 4. And I was trying to explain what a non-continuous warning tone is compared to a continuous warning tone, or we just strike that and ignore that.
Jennifer.
Thanks for getting some definitions in. I think that's going to be really helpful. I'm a little bit concerned about the possibility of having continuous warning tones be authorized, since we've all talked about how the intent of the department is to not cause permanent hearing loss or other permanent injury or disability. And I'm concerned that with this, it could be possible for someone to unintentionally give an order or follow an order that would result in that situation. And so I think it would be really helpful to either ban continuous warning tones or to spell out exactly what precautions would be taken to make sure that no one's hearing may be permanently compromised. I'm especially concerned about this this BS and beta to use it to maintain compliance of crowds, since that's kind of taking us in that direction of using the warning tone as a way to be a sound cannon at in crowd situations. One thing that I'm not sure of is I was really hoping to see some definition around how a repeated non-continuous use could become a continuous use. So if I were, if I were using the LRAD and I held it down for 5 seconds and then stopped, and then hit that warning blast again for 5 seconds right away, and just kept that up, how that might be considered non-continuous when it's in fact a continuous use. So those are the concerns I'm seeing here.
So I read some policies. I know some outside agencies have said that they'll provide warnings before continuous cycles. Again, we can leave this out. I didn't initially have definitions of continuous and non-continuous. Maybe it gets a little too confusing. And I see what you're saying about the gaining and maintaining compliance of crowds. I agree with you on that end. So we can totally take that out. And I kind of spelled it out. It's not used to annoy or harass anybody. But I also don't want to ban a continuous tone when maybe the foreseeable reason might need it. Where now we're banning a continuous, like I'm trying to gain someone's attention, and maybe 8 seconds would help, or 10 seconds. And again, like I said, a natural disaster or something. And again, like I know maybe 2 weeks ago we talked about, I prefer just getting on the LRAD and actually communicating as opposed to using the warning tone. I also don't want to ban it. I see some positives in it, But I agree with everyone here that we just have to make sure that we spell out, you know, how it's used appropriately. And I'm just trying to find that verbiage. I don't know if anybody else has a suggestion, or I can just revisit this, hopefully maybe when LRAD representative contacts me, and kind of seeing what other agencies have done in the past or nearby similar to this.
Is there any additional benefit to having a continuous warning tone, meaning more than 5 seconds, versus just multiple non-continuous 5-second warning tones?
Oh, that's another, yeah.
Just question. I mean, not like
Yeah.
has it, because it could be that you're, you know, that we do not have continuous warning tones and just have less limits on how often you can use the non-continuous warning, which isn't great, but would still kind of give you that option of, this is how we notify people: 5 seconds on, 5 seconds off, 5 seconds on, 5 seconds off. Jennifer?
I haven't seen any research, though I haven't dug too much on what that kind of use would mean in terms of long-term hearing impact. And so I am a little bit concerned about explicitly authorizing something that could lead to unintended hearing loss.
Is this something that we need to find out from the LRAD people? What studies they have done about exposure to warning tones, level, length, repetition that may cause such damage?
I can talk to them. I'm not seeing. There is one city that I looked at that actually spelled out the decibel rating of the 137, etc., and in relationship to how loud that actually is, and comparing it to something else. So I don't see the damaging of ears. Trying to find it right now. It spelled it out. I thought I had copied it on here, but there was one policy that spelled out, you know, 100 decibel rating is equivalent to a car backfiring. And it kind of spelled it out. I wish I had it on here. I'll try to find it, and explained what the maximum 137 decibel rating would be equivalent to. So I don't see the injury or the damaging of ears. I mean, obviously, if you're standing right next to it and you're within that 50 feet that we had articulated, then yeah, obviously. But if we're using it for policy, then I don't see the fact of how it would be injuring or damaging anybody's ears.
Jennifer?
One approach we could do is, if the department really wants to keep this, is in the impact report, when we talk about things like the permanent hearing loss and disabilities and lawsuits that cities have sustained from poor use of the LRAD, is we could put in a note that there hasn't been any precedent around what could happen in a repeated non-continuous use, and call that out as a possible side effect. And similarly, if the department really needs to authorize, hold this authorization for a continuous warning tone, then again, that can be something we point out in the impact report.
There's a member of the public in the chat who said 137.6 decibels is approximately a jet engine.
Yeah,
think
so
That number comes from the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, I think.
the San Diego Police Department did that in their policy. I was researching their agency. And they went from like 70 decibel rating is a busy street traffic. 105 is a lawnmower, 100 is a large orchestra. 105 is the LRAD, maximum volume. 140 decibel is the military jet takeoff at 50 meters. 146 decibel rating is the LRAD 500. And I think if you look at San Diego's, it actually said that these sound ratings are measured at 1 meter from the device. So I'm not an expert in decibel ratings and anything, but
Not in Oakland, but I know in Berkeley there's a couple of there's Bayer has the they test their warning system pretty regularly. Do we know what decibel level facilities like that have? Or for the tsunami warnings, what decibel levels those are? Because that might be okay.
I think this section is going to require some thinking. Perhaps what we could do is take a little bit of time over the next few weeks. Granted, we'll be working on some other policies to think about this and figure out what proposals we would have. We have one right here that sort of give or require commander authorization for continuous tones and not for non-continuous tones, with the general parameter of making sure that you deploy it and use it in a safe manner without anybody in front of it for certain distance or within a certain distance. It could be more restrictive, it could be less. Let's think about what those look like, especially with additional information from LRAD and some of these sound levels and the potential effects. I think to make an informed decision, we might need to know how loud or what amount of time someone can be exposed to certain sounds, certain levels before hearing damage, and avoid those that involve damage or potential damage to the best that we can. And anyways, we're probably going to need that information for the impact report, as Jennifer said. Does that sound like a plan?
yeah.
I'm going to try to think about this over the weekend too, and maybe try to do some of this offline. Okay. Were there other changes to this LRAD policy?
I have to wait on the LRAD for the children, the 50 feet. And then I added the inquiry and complaint process at the bottom similar to the drone. And that's it.
I'm looking at the document that you sent, and it looks like some of these changes were done live during our last session. Okay. Well, good work. Remind me, this state or local that we have to as a non-area of denial?
It is state. I'll check local.
I think local is only as an area denial.
I think you were right on that.
And the new section that was added would include use that could be interpreted as aerial denial.
You're talking about the warning tones?
Right, because if you're using it for crowd compliance, then that's basically, I don't know how else you could interpret that.
Yeah,
Well,
right. We take that out.
well,
I mean,
I think let's think about that. I can certainly understand the need to notify. I think we can work with that section in a way that goes with the department's intent to not use it as an area of denial device. Don't take it out quite yet. Let's figure this out. Do the work and trying to see if there is a way to do it. And you have some time, because since this is state only, then I think that means you come back after September 22nd.
got it.
Okay. Anything else on the LRAD policy? I will say that I am committed to making sure the policy reflects that it is not an area of denial device, not just the intent. But I think the department's on board with that too. So. Okay, last chance, going once, going twice. All right, and then we don't, DQ, we don't have any updates on the robots, is that right?
I don't think so. From the last one I sent, you know what? I forgot. I don't think I sent you videos, but I sent links to each of the robots and pole cams. Sent photographs. I think I forgot to send videos of what each one does.
Can you remind us which one? Part of the reason why we wanted you to do that was to see the one that the department was thinking about purchasing so that we can account for it in the policy. Can
So
you
I think
remind us which one that was?
there was a couple. There was the Andros and the iCore, which has the pan disruptor capable of bypassing bolt, lock, or disrupting packages through the usage of water, and the 12 gauge blank shotgun round. So that was one. The other one was that the Andros and the iCore have the capability of utilizing demobilizing vehicle tires with a blade, and then also having the window punch. And then the other one was that the Andros has the capability of an OC canister. So those were the main things. So I have to send you the videos on that. And then the other one was looking at potentially a different, I don't think I sent you the link on this one. The link of the, it's called Spot. So a lot of agencies or some agencies are looking to invest in Spot, which is a quote unquote robotic dog looking robot that can be colored black, yellow, pink, whatever color you want it, believe it or not. And that one, some agencies are looking into it. And that's the one that I've been looking into, only for the amount of, I think the capability of what it does and how it can actually make the other robots pretty much obsolete compared to what that one does.
Will you send us the link or the info on that when you have it through the email? so that we know what it is. I
And that's
think
just about it. We haven't started even looking into it, just an idea of me proposing to later on.
Sure, just what you think you may think about. Jennifer?
So robots are in the state, but not local. But if you attach a weapon, then they do go into local. So just something to be aware of.
OC canister count as a weapon?
I am not a lawyer. It says weapon
it
bearing. And
Well, tire slashing device and OC canister. I know you're not using it as such, but weapon bearing, I guess. All right. You may need to come back before 9/22.
but only if we want to, if the department wants to have the weapon bearing part used. If you don't use OC spray with it, if you don't,
We have not,
Okay.
but I wouldn't want to take that option away.
yeah, then we're gonna have to see you.
Yeah, I just don't, I mean, I just don't want to take the opportunity of something away where I can utilize the robot as opposed to having to send an officer in there, right? And it's just a robot. Again, we haven't done it before.
Are- Are you going to be okay with the additional, since you'll have to be doing an impact report for the robots as well then? And we've been talking about September, I think.
Think I'm almost done with the LRAD one, but obviously doing the impact ones for the drones and the robots. I'm going to try to get that to Lieutenant Turner. I think we have a date in mind set, so I'm trying to get them to him. It shouldn't be a problem though.
Well, here's what I'll say. Just because we have that deadline doesn't mean that, well, just means that if you don't make that deadline on robots, there's a period of time that you may not be able to use it. And that's only the OC and the tire slashing portions of it. I'm really splitting hairs now, but if you think that I wouldn't say you're removing it from the policy or removing it from your ability to use it, but you would just be losing out on being able to use it by a month if we brought you back after September 22nd. That makes sense?
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
How do you feel about that? How's the department feel about that?
Well, again, this is one of those where we've never utilized it actually in the field. I don't want to have us lose the opportunity of using the robots even for one day, or even drones, only because the amount of it's become now a day-to-day tool that everyone's always asking for, you know. So I'll talk to Turner offline and see what he thinks.
Hey, Lieutenant DQ, you know, with the significant increase in the number of subjects that are asleep with firearms in the vehicle, the robot's ability to disable tires, I think, could be a critical element of ongoing field operations. And I understand that, you know, we could have a potential delay in the use of a tactic that we've never used before. I don't see any issue with that as long as we can still deploy the robot in a non-tire puncturing manner. But I do believe that taking that option off the table is, as you described, a potential significant safety issue for officers in the future who are constantly coming into contact with these folks who are armed inside, barricaded inside of vehicles.
Now you bring up an excellent point. I think we had that today where they were trying to set up and the guy woke up and took off, which is totally fine. I mean, no officer got hurt. The suspect didn't get hurt, but I think it's another way of us trying to demobilize a vehicle and kind of minimize pursuits, etc. So
Yeah, I just think it's a great opportunity for us to de-escalate. What we're finding is that these folks who are waking up, either on their own or as a result of giving commands, they're intentionally driving into our vehicles, creating significant safety issues and significant property damage, endangering the community. But if the tires are disabled, that ends very quickly, de-escalating the situation for everybody. And when they realize that they can't leave, the amount of compliance that we garner from suspects at that point is extremely high. So I think it's a pretty valuable option.
Again, I'm not saying you're getting rid of it. I'm just saying you can't use it for a month, but I certainly hear the
Yes, we-
department saying that they would like to make sure they maintain the option, which means DQ, you're coming back. Oh, probably on the 14th or the 19th of September on
Yeah.
robots.
With impact reports.
Yep.
Finally put a
So we'll figure out which day that is, I guess, unless you have a preference.
no, I'm fine with this. I'm devoted. It's all good. Whatever.
Very good.
Yeah.
All right, Commissioner Jordan let me know that he's having some connection problems. So he may not make it back on. All right, I think those are your three policies. Thank you very much for your work.
No problem. Thank you.
Yep. Lieutenant Turner, you want to run us through 3H?
Sure. Let me share my screen. So first thing, I think for everyone received the Word document. So like I said, the all markup drives my eyes crazy. But should you decide to go to the use the Word format or function for all markup, you can kind of see where I've inserted things, where I've moved things around, hopefully by copy and paste. I tried to do that to show where I kept language that is already in the policy, but moved it to a different place. For the most part, Word wasn't really being that helpful for me. But in any event, you can kind of compare this to the policy that is currently available, both the department's website and on the ad hoc website for this ad hoc. In both areas, it is the same policy. So just to kind of talk over a little bit of the policy itself, and then I'll as well kind of take this opportunity in the forum to talk a little bit about some of the changes. So specialty impact munitions, called SIM, are basically the impact munitions at a distance, or an impact weapon at a distance. So impact weapons in terms of policing worlds are things like batons. That is an impact weapon. It is an intermediate use of force. The idea with specialty impact munitions is that they are fired from some sort of firearm typically, or a launcher of some sort. And I'll talk a little bit kind of about what we have. But these provide some standoff distance. So obviously, if you are with engaging someone, I should say, with a baton, you have to be very close to them. The specialty impact munitions allow for that to be standoff. So did add a purpose section, and much of what I took from this is from either somewhere else in the policy or our use of force policy, the department's use of force policy. So it talks a little bit about why specialty impacts munitions might be used. Two main reasons is as a force option at a distance against someone, and then also they can be used to either distract or damage items. So thinking about things like breaking windows to be able to see inside. Sometimes we've used them against surveillance cameras when we have someone barricaded, say in their home or something like that, so that they cannot see where the officers are moving to ambush. We have had a few unfortunate situations where people have been, like after domestic incidents, barricaded inside their home and then firing out at officers. So the less that they know about where the officers are, the better. Also added a section, or sort of reorganized to an authorized use section, because that is required by the law and policy, but that the authorized use is basically around the use of intermediate force options. So very similar to the to the baton. This does talk specifically about non-crowd control versus crowd control, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Kept much of this language in here around lethal versus less lethal. The reason being probably the less changes, the better, I suppose, in the policy, and always to consider keeping that sort of thing in there. Some specific requirements around SIM that currently exist that I believe probably should stay around training, that they only use specific SIM for which they have been trained, and that training records, lesson plans need to be maintained. Some of these considerations or requirements for use, some more technical things. So talking about these bean bags, some of the things that we require, for instance, lethal force backup, some targeting consideration, and requirements that if anyone is struck, they are transported to the hospital. A prohibited use section. So I did kind of reorganize some of these things so that prohibited uses were by themselves. And you can see that there are several prohibited uses, including indiscriminately against people or crowds, things like that. There are target areas which we are not allowed to target unless it is a lethal force situation. So crowd control, there is in the current policy a large section around crowd control and crowd management usage. I propose taking all that out and instead referring back to the training bulletin about crowd control. There's a couple reasons for this. I know that the crowd control training bulletin is going to have the most updated information, both from the new our settlements with other groups specifically surrounding the use of specialty impact munitions in crowd control, and as well as the law, so AB 48 around that. So I propose that we refer back to the training bulletin, but that I think there's pretty much a core of both AB 48 and our the injunction requirements, which is that you cannot use these sorts of SIMs to manage crowds, that basically they are allowed to be used in crowd control situations only when a specific person poses basically a lethal threat or a similar type of threat. And at that time, then SIM could be used against that person specifically, so they cannot be used indiscriminately and things like that. So I propose to distill kind of that sentiment, which I'm sure will be pretty large and voluminous in the crowd control policy, into maybe one or two lines to make sure that's hammered home. So deployment consideration. So again, this policy would be specifically around the use of SIM in non-crowd control situations. So deployment considerations, some of the things where we are required to consider, some of the requirements that you can see, there are several that are either things that we need to consider or things that we need to do when using the SIM. There is a training section, added this in. So this is the current practice. So it basically just puts that into a written policy. So sworn members do receive training on the SIM every continued professional training cycle, which is about every year or 18 months. And that does include this, the live fire overview of the policy, information on situations in which SIM may be used for tactical purposes other than as a weapon, and then also to reiterate the SIM prohibitions during crowd control, because I do think that is important. It's the law, it's crowd control policy. Understanding that we need to keep track of how many of these munitions we do use for the annual report, even if they're expended during training, which the vast majority of our expenditures are during training. So I propose that training staff keep that and report it quarterly to the militarized equipment coordinator within the department for inclusion into the annual report. So some things in here, this talks a little bit more about these different projectiles, non-flexible versus flexible, single projectile versus multiple, and direct fire versus indirect or skip fire. One thing to really note, as I was going through, I excised some things that did not make sense or that we no longer had. members of our training staff asked me to specifically to keep skip fire in here, even though it is prohibited. So you can see that in actually 2 places, it says that indirect or skip fire munitions are not authorized. However, this is to ensure that if people come from either military or other law enforcement agencies where that sort of behavior is authorized, that it is not something that they miss or that they think is authorized somehow. So that is one of the reasons why we kept that in. The training bulletin.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
Is that in the prohibited uses section? Because I didn't see it, or should it be?
Yeah, you know what? I think that probably should be. I noted here a couple times, but I'm going to make a note that that should be in the prohibited uses. Because yes, that is a prohibited use. All right. So the training bulletin does talk about some of the effects of these of the use of these munitions, both mental and physical effects, including that there are the possibility of abrasions, lacerations, contusions, fractures, and even penetration. So that I know that is something that we talk about. Viable target areas are part, including a picture, some factors around targeting. This does discuss non-target areas, specifically talks about the munitions that are deployed or that are issued by the department, including these 12-gauge specialty impact munitions with pictures. There is a picture of the 870 shotgun through which those are deployed. Now, again, this is not authorized during crowd control, so there was some language around crowd control there. These that was excised because those are no longer authorized. Safety checks. This is something, and I do like having this specifically spelled out in the training bulletin. It is an important step, and it is memorialized and documented as such as each 5. And I know this is something that happens in the training. The policy further goes on to these 40 millimeter single and multi-shot launchers. So you'll note a change from the previous policy. It talked about 37 millimeter. Those are no longer issued or used by the department for direct fire specialty impact munitions. So it's only the 40 millimeter that is used. The foam baton and the direct impact round. It does also speak about another item that we have in the inventory, which is the hand deployed specialty impact munition Stinger grenade that is limited solely to use by the tactical operations teams. These are not deployed or issued to any field personnel or patrol personnel. Finally, some discussions around post-deployment consideration, including first aid or medical treatment evidence. I did add an equipment use reporting. Lieutenant Thomason noted that. So, for instance, using these SIM as a use of force is a level 2 use of force. So is an intermediate use of force, and level 2 is a force reporting category, but that basically is a very high level of reporting that would require a force review board. However, he did note that, well, what if officers use this controlled equipment, say against a window or something, and we need to report that for the annual report? How are we going to make sure that gets, if a person is not struck, it's not a use of force report. So said good point. And so there's a requirement now, anyone using these SIM outside of training have to report the use to the supervisor. The uses of force will continue to be handled as our use of force reporting, but these other uses, like a camera or window or something, need to be reported to the military equipment deployment notification process by that, whoever it is, that person's commander. So we keep, and it's the same process that Lieutenant Thomason has already put in place for the rest of this reporting. Documentation, much of this, so you'll note a change in just verbiage. It goes from subject to engaged person pretty much everywhere within the document. A lot of these are questions that need to be asked or discussed during reporting of use of force. And I believe that is the extent of the policy. So that's kind of a first glance of what it looks like. Like I said, it tried to reorganize a little bit, explicitly call out some of the sections that are required by the law, and then excise some of those things that are no longer applicable, or that will be handled, say, in the crowd control policy.
Does the stinger grenade, should that, I know it's here because that's how the department views it. Do you think that also falls under chemical?
Yeah, I definitely, if it does incorporate, and so I was on the tactical team, and I've never seen one of these, so I know we have them. I don't know whether the ones that we have or issued to the tactical team, I'm no longer part of that, incorporate any CS or OC laden powder. I don't know if Lieutenant Babel or maybe Chief Allison, if you have any idea, but I think all of us kind of, it's been a minute since we've been involved in the tactical team.
Yeah, from my I left tactical command of the team. We had some. We were not using them for crowd management. They are a useful tool in barricaded subjects. So if you might have an individual in a room that they need to be dislodged or compelled to get out of a room, the stinger grenade can serve as that purpose. So certainly in those situations where they're deployed on an individual, there would be, obviously, we'd have to meet the thresholds of force, so the Granby counter standards, and we'd have to, because it does emit or does discharge small little pellets, that would have to be, in an area where the impacted party is going to only be the individual that would be subject to that force. It's the reason why we don't use it in crowd control, because those pellets could hit individuals that are not intended for impact. So their localized use are historically for those reasons in tactical operations.
So when I look at the description, it sort of has those 4 different stimuli. And so under this policy, it seems like the pellets are the part that puts it under this policy. It also kind of looks like it might fall under flashbangs and chemical munitions. So the question is whether it still has those other things, the light, the sound, and the chemical agent powder, because the chemical part would bring it under the, I think would make it fall under the policy.
So it does. It's interesting. So, when it comes to chemical dispersal, it can be dispersed in various means. It could be dispersed in aerosol. It could be dispersed in a burning agent. And then it could be dispersed, obviously, in an OC canister. It could be dispersed in a blast device. So a blast device would historically have the loud report and light. And then the blast devices can have different contents. It could have 0 chems, it could have OC or CS or CN. It could have CS or CN with pellets, or it could have no chemical with pellets. They all do have a loud report and a flash, because when the device basically ignites or blasts, it's when the Bouchon and the firing pin hits the primer, it'll create that flash and that sound. But the payloads could vary depending on what type is used. Again, for crowd management, we do not use pellets because of the uncontrolled nature of the impacts. We do use the chemical piece, which you'll see how it will be regulated in 3G as well as F2. As far as the impacts, we just needed the impact piece of it because it does have the impact part.
Appreciate it. Thank you. It does strike me that we'll probably see this section about the stinger grenade in some other policies.
Right. You'll see a prohibition. You'll actually see it called out as a stinger grenade in 3G. And then you'll see something called a CS blast device, which is not the sting ball device, as a tool that is utilized not only in crowd management, but in chemical deployments in the tactical team.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Let's see. I saw training. Who's the person who's going to have the oversight authority? Does this training bulletin say, or is it going to be in somewhere else? I'm sort of going through the mental checklist.
Yeah. So this one is similar to an impact weapon that an officer might have on their person. So, and this again, just talking about, this is not crowd control. This is the use of an impact weapon against a person as a use of force. So it is the same in terms of the authority. This does devolve all the way down to the individual police officer for the similarly to the straight wood batons that we do issue to every officer.
I saw that there was some training requirements. Is this like the rifle program where they have to test into it, or it kind of sounded different than what you just described?
Yeah, you're right. There is no testing into it. Every sworn officer is required to train. So when they are in the police academy or shortly thereafter before going into field training, every person, every sworn member gets training in this, and then they're required to get training every year. And the reason is because unlike the patrol rifle program, any sworn member who's going out on the street into the field can check out an 870 shotgun, and does get issued, and every member gets issued, I think 5 or 10 of the specialty impact munitions that they can, and we do encourage them to bring these out in the field. And one of the reasons being is that this is an excellent tool to create and maintain distance while still having an intermediate force option that may go beyond the effective range of the taser, the electronic control weapon. So we have seen the specialty impact munitions be very successful at overcoming threats that in other agencies sometimes do end up in shooting with lethal ammunition.
What are the 5 to 10? You said 5 to 10 something. Are the projectiles, or are we talking about the stinger grenades?
Oh, sorry, just the projectiles. Yes, stinger grenades are not issued to anyone for as normal use. Now, those are only for the tactical team, and the tactical team does not issue them out. They have them in sort of a locked area, and those are issued with command from the tactical commander, which is at the least a lieutenant. In terms of what's issued to our patrol officers, it is the specialty impact munition drag stabilized beanbag round that does fit in the 870 shotgun.
I see Erickson with his hand up.
Thank you. When it comes to the use, I've seen there's the prohibit use when it comes to animals and also like women that are pregnant. And I didn't catch the one for the youth, because given that, if it's not being used on, like animals and can we just add adolescents in general to that?
Yeah, I think so there is a prohibition around preteen children and those who are over and elderly over 70 to use the SIM against them unless they pose a lethal threat. So that also, just like any weapon that the officers have, so just like the baton that is on their belt, this is an intermediate force option that basically requires about assaultive resistance or in immediate threat or significantly severe chain of events or circumstances in order to use. So unlike the use of a control hold or something like that, this would require some pretty significant circumstances. One of the circumstances that typically mitigate against using intermediate force is age of a person who's being engaged and whether or not that person can pose a threat given their age. That includes adolescents and the elderly.
Okay, thank you. And even for like physical use, like what about like mental use, like folks that are schizophrenic, like, you know, and have those, but you know, you can't tell, you know, just because they're not physical. What about those?
Yeah, that's a good point. You know, we don't call that out specifically here in this policy, though, again, because these, at least the majority of use contemplates using these as force, using this against people. And so our force policy always applies. And our force policy specifically talks about in our de-escalation section, and also in the value statement at the beginning, that officers need to take into account the possibility or mental illness, other sort of disabilities like that, and to adjust accordingly. So that is something that would still apply. The de-escalation policy requirement that's in our force policy would apply when using these type of weapons.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
How often does the 40 millimeter get checked out or issued?
So the 40 millimeter is not available to the regular patrol staff. It is only available to our trained tactical operations staff, and possibly the patrol rifle officers, though I'd have to check on that, whether they get training in that. So it is checked out relatively regularly anytime that the tactical operations team is used. I believe they take them out for regular call outs to have as a long distance, less lethal force option. They may also use the Remington 870 and the drag stabilized beanbags during those. Then it is requires the only in those AB48 3G very limited things, but the only one that we are allowed to use by court injunction is the 40 millimeter for crowd control. That's the only one we're allowed to deploy. We cannot deploy the 870 and drag stabilized beanbag for those. So every time there's what we call a tango team for any major crowd control events where there's the possibility of violence, those are deployed to the field. Their use is obviously much less frequent.
While we're on the topic of tactical operations teams, there's a question from a community member about the use of stinger grenades and flashbangs and considerations when children are present. Is that something that we're going to see in this policy, or would that be in tactical operations, or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely am going to, you know, I think it's kind of prescient that you talked about the stinger grenades as being controlled by like the flashbang or CS, because I think that's where we're going to see that controlled. But yes, to answer the short answer to the question is absolutely the presence of children or the possibility, the distinct possibility that children might be present is a large factor, and oftentimes precludes us from using things like flashbangs. We typically do a risk assessment and just realize that is not worth it at that point.
Okay. Jennifer?
Thanks. I've got a couple questions. For the shotguns, I saw that there are some that are orange and some that are black. Is that still the case? And when does one or the other get used?
We do still have, I believe, a few that are orange in the inventory. We used to bring the orange ones out for crowd control when we had this. So that since those are no longer issued or allowed for crowd control, I don't believe those are brought out at all. And the reason being is because the patrol shotgun, when an officer goes out on patrol, he or she can check out a shotgun. Those are the all black ones. And we want to make sure that people do not check out those orange ones because they can fire live rounds. So it is not a good idea to have people go around on patrol with a shotgun that they think, just because of the way it looks, that it only fires less lethal ammunition when that is not true. And that's one of the reasons why we really do hammer home that 5-step safety plan that involves 2 people.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful. So that means that if a member of the public were to see one of these black shotguns, they wouldn't be able to tell if it were live or impact munitions.
That's correct. So that is one downside, is when you're, sort of using a tool for multiple things. Yeah. And that it is noted in here about those mental effects, the idea that pointing firearms at people, especially the black long item that looks like a shotgun, can have some deleterious mental effects on people. So one of the things, and also, right, we also want to call out and make aware that officers or other law enforcement agents coming to the scene, seeing one of our police officers pointing a black shotgun and firing at a person, might think that there is a lethal threat and respond accordingly. So that's one of the reasons why it explicitly says in the policy to notify everyone, both verbally and on the radio, that these are going to be used in a less lethal fashion. Our current force policy does require warnings unless not feasible about the use of force. That is included. That includes impact weapons such as these. So there would be, unless not feasible, a warning to that person that to cease their resistance or to comply, or else that the SIM might be used against them. So that would be another opportunity for them to learn that this is less lethal.
Yeah, you mentioned that the pointing the weapon is, it's a very threatening thing to receive. Is that I couldn't tell from the reporting section if pointing or carrying the weapon is would get recorded.
Yeah, you're right. It's not in this one because it is more generally any firearm, any pointing of any firearm, including a firearm armed with or loaded with less lethal ammunition, is a reportable use of force that does need to be reported.
I'm kind of assuming that when the shotguns are issued, it's to someone who's got a patrol car and it lives in the patrol car.
The way we do it is they don't live in the patrol car because they tend to not be taken care of as well. So they live in a locked facility inside the police buildings at the Eastmont or the police administration building. We have a key accountability system that they use a proximity card to retrieve the key. The key then unlocks the shotgun from the rack. They take the shotgun out for their duties. At the end, they do lock it in the patrol car during the shift. At the end of the shift, they bring it back into the control room. They put it back, they lock it back up, they return the key.
Yeah, okay, yeah, that totally makes sense. So if an officer checks one out, locks it into their patrol car, would it get recorded if they went to the patrol car and removed it from the patrol car?
So yes, that is another one. And there's a requirement that just removing the shotgun or the rifle, for instance, the patrol rifle from the rack for an incident, or taking one's handgun out is what we call KDE. There's a required disposition code. So yeah, that is also a reported thing that can be tabulated. Yes.
When you say rack, do you mean the one in the car?
Yes, I do mean the one in the car. And that also kind of dovetailing with our other ad hoc, when you open the, when you hit the button or series of buttons that opens the gun rack, it sends a signal to the body worn cameras to turn them on too. So it's kind of cool.
Last time we talked about patrol rifles, the assault rifles that only get issued if you're, if someone is a patrol rifle officer, would they also get the shotgun?
They can. So the way that it works now is that at the beginning of an officer's shift, they have the option to check out a shotgun. It really depends on that officer. Every California peace officer is required by post to be trained and proficient in the use of the patrol shotgun. That's with lethal ammunition. So that's required by post. So they train on that and they're tested on that in the academy and required to train on that every year in continuous professional training, or every 18 months. So they have, the way that we work, they have the option. Those with the patrol rifle typically don't bring a shotgun, just because it kind of gets a little busy inside the police car. And most of the time what we do, those of us in patrol typically exhort our officers to bring out a shotgun, because it is such a versatile tool.
Okay. Does that mean that if you have an officer who's not in a patrol car, but like a motorcycle, I forget if they're a bicycle or foot patrol, do they check one out, or?
No, yeah, it doesn't. So I don't believe our motorcycles, like CHP, you might see sometimes they have a rack in there. I don't believe our motorcycles have a rack for a shotgun. Bicycles, definitely not. And foot patrol, definitely. There's, so very similar to the shotgun. There's no like walking around like we're, Mexican federales with this thing on. Now that's, yeah, it is checked out for the patrol vehicle. And then there is a specific way, very similar to the rifle, that the shotgun is kept in the patrol car, which is that the magazine tube has ammunition in there, but the chamber is empty, so that it doesn't accidentally, when you hit a bump, it doesn't fire through the roof, since it has a free floating firing pin.
Cool. I'll ask one more brief one, and then see if anyone else has questions. For the deployment considerations, the first section on pregnant women, would you be open to changing that language to pregnant people?
I don't think we have any objection around that, as long as it's clear that the person who's pregnant.
Yeah, being able to say pregnant people, or a person who is known or should reasonably be known to be pregnant, would be awesome. Thank you.
Real quick, is there a distance of firing in order to prevent like bodily injury to a person?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's an optimal energy range, which is 20 to 75 feet for these sims, and then there is a minimum, which I am trying to remember where that might be. Sorry, but there definitely is a minimum safe distance at which, and I believe it's within 7 yards, so just under this 20 feet, at which we do not allow the use of the drag stabilized beanbag rounds or the specially impact munitions, because they can cause penetrating injuries, which is not the desired response.
Thank you.
Make sure to note where to ask where that is here, and highlight if it's not.
I've got another question if no one else wants to. Yeah, okay. Cut me off if anyone else has more questions. So I really liked how you split out the prohibited uses. That was really helpful to see. I'm looking at the rest of it, and kind of thinking about if I were to describe authorized use, would I be able to, since the laws require authorized use? And I'm not sure I can. It looks almost like the authorized use is saying officers have used their own discretion, and these are the factors that should impact that discretion. Is that right? Or am I missing something?
Well, it is it's close to what you're saying. It is that they use their discretion that is severely curtailed by use of force laws. So I guess what the authorized uses, that is authorized to use this type of force as long as intermediate impact force would be authorized under like our general order on use of force.
What we're looking at is for their specific uses is that first sentence in authorized use, which is shall only be used as a weapon against an engaged person. So engaged person, where objectively reasonable, necessary, and proportional. It is rather vague because it covers a lot of situations. It feels like it would cover AB 481, since AB 481 says authorized uses for which agency proposes. The local ordinance, it says the specific uses that are authorized. Gets us a little in a little bit of a tricky situation because it's, you know, it would be really weird to have this be more specific than the situations where you can use a firearm or a regular a pistol. Right, because that also, I imagine, is just covered by use of force.
Yeah.
K3.
Right, it is, yeah, the Graham versus Connor, and then further limited by our use of force policy.
Right, and so it feels weird to have a lesser level, and the intermediate use of force be more restricted.
Right. So yeah, that was kind of a little bit of the difficulty was, you know, the idea that this is an intermediate use of force. I think there's, you know, if we're talking about, I sort of saw two areas where there's the possibility. The one is to really highlight some of the prohibited uses or in the authorized use, so that it's authorized to use as a you know, as a long distance impact munition, or, you know, to highlight some of the idea around SIM being something that allows for that standoff distance, and somehow work that into an authorized use. And then the second was the idea around authorized uses for other than you know, the use of force, which is one that I am sort of concerned, or it just makes me want to make sure that people have a good idea of when this can be used as like a distraction device, or to break something, right? I don't want people just doing it willy-nilly, which is not happening, but you know, still it's always, as a sort of police administrator, a concern to me that intent is properly communicated.
So I take back what I said. There are other parts of this authorized use which do seem to spell out specific uses. I think broadly they are categorized on when you can use it on a person, when you can use it on an object, which is the paragraph under the standard, may be used in non-crowd control situations, distraction devices, or destroy an object. I know that below you had a prohibited use about distracting or something about animals, but you don't have animals as your authorized use in your authorized use. So I think in your authorized uses, perhaps you may need to flip some of the prohibited uses, right? So I generally think of it as you can use it on people in these circumstances, you can use it in objects in these circumstances, you can use it in animals in these circumstances.
That makes sense.
That might get us to a more specific place without getting too specific.
Understood.
Jennifer, does that, I know it doesn't get us to, you know, use it in this situation, but it might get us to a place that might comport with specific uses a little better.
I think that helps. Yeah, it's a good suggestion.
Anything else besides people, animals, and objects?
Celebration? No, just kidding. No.
Um,
On training, but is that it?
Probably is training. Actually, I mean, I think that is a specific use that does need to be called out.
Okay, this is probably gonna have to start with an explanation from you. I'm a little bit confused about the skip fired one because it says you can't use it on people. So that means it would be used on objects, but I don't really understand how it gets used. If
Yeah, so well, the idea of skip fire is that it bounces off something before hitting its target, typically the ground. And this is useful for going under objects or something like that. The issue is that it's when you hit the thing that you are aiming at, then the next bounce is based on physics, of which you have much less control, right? So that's the issue with skip fire. I do want to ask our tactical team. I sort of had a brief moment with them when I asked, hey, are you using any sort of skip fire? And they said, no, we are not, but we want you to keep it in the policy. So that way, if new people come in, we are very clear that we don't use that. But I needed to clarify whether that also means that they do not use skip fire against at all, which is what it sounded like. So in which case, I think a more blanket saying we do not skip fire sim period would be more appropriate, because that also struck me, the idea that it said against people, because then I thought, well, does that mean we use skip fire against objects or what? So I need to have a conversation. It sounds like they're saying no, they don't use skip fire in general. That to me makes sense because skip fire seems uncontrolled, and thus you could be trying to skip off to an object and then hit a person, which is not what we want to do. So but I just need to double check that. And then if so, that we'll rewrite that to make that a lot more clear.
okay, cool. That was the only one where it felt like it didn't quite fit in.
Right. It didn't quite make sense. I agree with you there.
I think the only other things I would mention for tonight's purposes is a section about registering complaints.
Okay. Plagiarized DQ. Got it.
Yep. Mechanisms to ensure compliance with ME use policy.
Mhm.
You have training. Maybe some clarification about who has oversight authority. I mean,
Probably going to be training division, considering that this is something that is for a standard issue for sworn. So, okay.
Yeah. That's what I've got off the checklist, Jennifer. Either on this or something separate, whatever.
Separate. I wanted to go back to what Erickson had raised about the kids situation. And one thing that was sort of bothering me a little bit is we know that kids of color, especially Black and brown kids of color, get treated as older than they actually are, right? It's like you've got Tamir Rice playing in the playground and he's 12 and he's treated like an adult man. And so I'm wondering whether 10 is too young for this, and we need to be, like Erickson was suggesting, making sure that adolescents are included in this.
Yeah, I think that's a possibility. I'd want to probably get some more input from the training staff, the department, the chief, the assistant chief, on where they think. I know we do restrict the use, for instance, of the police canine, and that one is 18 or older only, absent exigent circumstances. So it is not unprecedented that a force option has been limited against people who are under the age of 18. I'd like to probably say, yeah, let me put a pin in that and check back. And if you wouldn't mind, kind of, if there are other places where you see that, or there's some other agency that's kind of providing some forward-looking guidance, that'd be worth knowing about.
Yeah, thank you.
It just feels so weird to limit the intermediate use of force.
It does. I agree with you there, Jesse, because it's really like intermediate force options are a really important part of the way that we really train police officers to de-escalate, and especially things like these. Like, for instance, we used these extensively. There was a couple officers went to a call. This was less than a year ago. And, as they showed up, the person produced a handgun, opened fire. They opened fire back. Luckily, no one's rounds on either side were fatal. And so then this person discarded the gun, but then was, agitated. There was a lot of this use of these sims. And that ended up with that person in custody, where I think in other agencies that person would have probably likely been fatally shot, having already shot at police officers. So these are really useful items. On the other hand, they are just like any other weapon, potential for misuse, injuries, a lot of things that are risk factors, and balancing those is a difficult one.
Yeah. I mean, I'd so much rather the rules be clear and so that officers don't have to do too much thinking about, can I use intermediate force or do I have to go straight to lethal? I would want them to prioritize the intermediate if they can, and if they would, and not have, but also we have to do what we need to do.
Right.
From a like,
yeah. And we're trying to limit, another thing that the department is trying to do is limit the reliance on force, period. Too much of a sort of allowance for intermediate force sometimes allows for, a quick trigger, as you will, but with intermediate force options, right? Like electronic control weapons or these type of things, where we don't get then the de-escalation or, some things, or maybe even just using physical control. And so it's a tough balance to strike. I agree.
Jesse, one thing that might be helpful to think about is there's that section, the factor around sympathetic fire. And that's really not a hypothetical situation. It's like we read pretty regularly about situations where there's a tense moment, and then a less lethal is fired, and then it's immediately followed by lethal fire, and someone is killed or severely injured in a way that didn't have to happen. And so I understand what you're coming from about how it feels weird for this to have such strict guidance. At the same time, I feel like having officers think about the impact of on the human who's receiving this is helpful for thinking about, how do I de-escalate, not by shooting someone less hard, but how do I de-escalate in a way that doesn't have to cause physical harm to anyone. And so that combined, so that way of thinking combined with how do we reduce the opportunities for sympathetic fire, where everyone's on edge, you hear a shot, and then you kill someone without thinking about it.
I absolutely think it's more setting out some parameters for this, but not also doing so on options that are lethal. Right. So I think that's what it is.
Maybe we'll do this next.
Let's see. Anything else on this policy? Our quick overview and some initial thoughts. Well, I don't think anyone's going to complain about ending early. I do think we are still coming back to this on Monday, so that everyone has some time to absorb it, think about it, see if there's anything else that any other comments or suggestions that they may have. And we will bring it back on Monday. What is that? The 29th, along with chemical munitions. Right, that's Jennifer.
I was wondering if you could walk us through the upcoming schedule, because I'm starting to lose track.
Yeah, let me share the screen of what I got.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you.
It's not an official one, it's really just a Word document. So I have for Monday 3H, which is what we just looked at, and chemical munitions, which is, help me out. Is it FO2?
5 V like Victor, F Frank, O2. Don't ask me why, what the naming convention was. I did not create that.
Tear gas and flashbangs, or
Tear gas will cover some CS, like the chief said, as some CS blast type things, but not just flashbangs. Those will have their own separate policy.
On Wednesday, we will be looking at the revisions to K6 and then have our, not the first look, but first discussion about 3G crowd control. I think Lieutenant Thomason said that they have a final meeting about that tomorrow. And hopefully we'll be able to give us the draft before the weekend, but no, I'm not making promises for him. And then we are not meeting on Labor Day. I have the 3 things that I think we are going to start seeing or may have by that 9/7 date here, which is mobile command post, which is Lieutenant Thomason, Lieutenant Fleming. By then we may have flashbangs and explosive breaching, which are going to be 2 different policies. And we're going to start seeing impact reports. I think we'll probably have a little bit more information on the timeline for those next week. And then we can set out the schedule a little bit better for September. And I will set out next week's schedule in an email.
this is awesome. Thank you.
Okay.
Questions, final thoughts, anybody? Have a good night, everybody.
Excellent.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Good night.
Have a good night.